Hi there, I'm Eitan, and welcome to WiX Fixer. Today I'll be showing you how to create an auto-saving form that saves even if the user does not click the submit button. So let's get started. Okay, so before we get started, just a short anecdote about the thumbnail. If you're a returning viewer, you might have noticed that I changed the style a bit. And just a disclaimer, the person in that picture is not me. It's just somebody who's much better at looking surprised than I am. It's stock footage. But if you do like that new style, do give me a thumbs up just so I know to continue with that and not go back to the old one. Okay, sorry about that brief intro. And now we're going to actually get started creating an auto-saving form on Wix. So in order to do that, I added a plain Wix form. You can also use a custom form. Um, and there are several different ways that we can approach this, but all of them will need us to store the data in a collection. So the first thing that we're going to do is create a collection to store that data. And I'm going to go right over here to Content Manager and create a collection. And now we're going to need to name this collection. So I'll just call this one Progress Log. Okay, this will log the progress of the form. And I'm going to create this collection. And the first thing that I'm going to do when I create this collection is change the permissions. And that is because I'm going to want to let site members add content. So I'm going to change this to site member, and I'm going to change this to site member as well. So I'm going to let site members change the content of this collection so that we can actually log the progress. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a field that will actually keep track of who the member is that is logged in and whose progress we have saved. So for that, I'm going to create just a plain text field. And you can also do this with a multi-reference field, but I'm just going to do a text field because it's a little simpler. So I'm going to go here and call this one member ID. And this is where we're going to save the member IDs. I'm going to save that, and I'm going to make that the primary and get rid of my title, which I don't need. Great. So here we get to kind of a crossroads in terms of how we store the data. So there's two ways we can do it. One is by creating a field for each part of the input form. Okay, so each input will have its own field in this progress log data set collection. Or we can just create one object which will log all of the inputs in one object. And each of them has pros and cons. So if it's very important for you to see all of the data in a collection, you want to export it to CSV, I don't know what, then you'll want to do the first option that I described. But if you really just want to save the progress to use for the user to kind of just improve the user experience, then you really don't need to set up a field for each one. But I'm going to kind of do a combination between the two. You probably wouldn't do this in reality, but I'm doing it just to demonstrate the two options. So I'm going to create one field that I'm going to call first name. And this is where we're going to store the first name input. And then I'm going to create another field, which I'm going to call progress. And this is going to be an object. Okay, so this is going to be an object storage field, and I'm going to call this progress. And this is where we're going to save the rest of the form. And again, you choose between one of the two in real life scenario, but I'm doing both here just to show you how it's done. Okay, so we have our progress log set up, and now we're going to head back to our form and get our form all prepped. So again, with our form, we're going to want to rename these inputs. And again, depending on which option you choose, you'll name them differently. So if you choose the fields option, then for example, for first name, I'm just going to actually name it first name. Okay. And for the other inputs, if you're going to use the progress option saved as an object, then you're actually going to want to give all the inputs a similar name and just increase the number by one each time. So for example, this input 3, I'm actually going to name it form input 1. Okay, again, form input could be different. It could be whatever you choose to name it, but 1 is important. And we're going to keep on going in ascending order. And I'm just going to change the name of each of these inputs to form input and one more. So I'm going to edit this field, go over here, and two we did already, 3. And this will be 4. And this will be 5. And we're done. Okay, so that's all of my form inputs. Great, so now our form is prepped. And what we're going to do is we are going to start writing the code that will actually save our progress. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to need to do before we start saving our progress is actually get our member. And we're going to do that using this API from the WiX API documentation. And I'm just going to copy this code right over and paste that right in here. And we don't need all of this. This is just showing you what you get back from the promise, and I don't need that. I actually just need this. And imports, remember that they need to be on the top level outside of the onReady function. And next, I'm going to create a wrapper function, which is going to wrap this action. So I'm going to call that function getMember. And that's going to be a function that executes all of this over here. And of course, if you want to use async await, then you'll be changing this promise into, this will be an async function, and you'll get rid of this then, and etc. But I'm not going to show that here. In this video, I'm just going to use the code as it is in the WiX documentation. And I don't need to pass options here because I don't need anything special from this method. And after we get this member, what I'm going to do is I'm going to store that member ID in a global variable. So I'm going to say const member ID. Sorry, actually this should be a let because we're going to need to change the value of this. So member ID. And after we get back the member, we are going to say that member ID is equal to member.id. So just in brief, what this method does, it gets the current member, the person who's currently logged in, and assuming that there is a member, then it'll return an object with all of that member's information, part of which is their ID. And then I'm just going to keep record of that ID by setting this member ID to that member ID that we get back from the member. Okay? And if we don't have a member, then this will just stay undefined. So we have our member, and don't forget to call this function so that it actually executes. Excellent. So the next thing that we're going to want to do once we have our member is we're going to want to start saving the progress. And in order to save the progress, we're going to be using this save API from the WiX data API. So I'm going to just copy this code over again and stick it right here under this code. Again, we don't need the item that comes back. What we need to do is just take this import and put it at the top level. And if you know all this code by heart, you can just write it out. You don't have to copy it from the API. I just find it easier because it helps me prevent making mistakes and stuff like that. And I'm going to create another wrapper function, and I'm going to call that save progress. And this is going to be a function that actually executes this save method. And I'll paste that right in there. Excellent. So let's explain what's happening here, and let's set it up so that it fits our scenario. So first we have to define the item that we want to save as an object. And we don't have title anymore, so we only have ID. And this ID is going to be the ID of this item. And we're going to store that as well in a global variable. So I'm going to call this progress ID. And this is going to be the specific item ID of this person's form progress. And this is going to be progress ID. And the way this works is that if progress ID will be undefined at any point, then when WiX data saves it to the collection, it'll create a new item. But if progress ID is defined, it will only update the current item. Okay, so this will be good for us because it lets us to also create the item the first time the person is creating the form and to update it whenever they are returning to the form and just need to update it. And we have a field called first name, and that will be equal to the value of first name dot value. Okay, and again, this is only in this case where you're actually using individual fields. If you're using the progress method, then you'll have progress, and that will be equal to another global variable that we're going to define, which is going to be progress. And that's going to be right over here. And last but not least, we cannot forget the member ID. And that is going to be equal to member ID. Okay. And let's format that. Excellent. So we created our toSave object. And now we need the name of our collection. So I'm going to go here to databases, and we have progress log and edit settings. And here we have the collection ID. So that's what I'm going to need to copy over and put that right here. Okay. And then after we save our progress log, it's going to return the actual item that comes back. So we can say saved progress and then log the item, just so that we can kind of keep track of what's going on in our code. Excellent. And now what we need to do is we need to decide when we're going to save the progress. And here again, there are different approaches that we can take. So one approach that we can take is that we can save it at intervals. So we can save it, for example, every 3 seconds or something like that. Or we can change it whenever we make a change to our input field. And that's the method that I'm going to choose. And in order to do that, we are going to need to set on change event listeners for all of our inputs. Okay, so what we're going to do is we are going to create another function, and we're going to say, we're going to call this set on change listeners. Okay, and what we're going to be doing here is we are going to be looping through each of our inputs and setting an event listener for them. So I'm going to say for, and since we have 5 inputs, I'm going to say let I equal 1. And then as long as I is smaller than 6, then I plus plus. So a very simple for loop. And inside this loop, we're going to set our event listeners. So I'm going to select each of the inputs using a template literal and form input. And instead of 1, I'm going to have I here as a variable. Okay, so this will go through and set it for each one. And then on click, sorry, not on click, I said on change we want to do. On change, we are going to save progress. Okay, so our progress will be saved every time we make a change. And there's one more thing that we need to do here, which is set the event listener for our first name field. And again, this is kind of like a mishmash of 2 different techniques, so that's why it might look a little unorderly. But depending on which technique you choose, you'd need to do it in a different way. And the same thing is going to happen here in terms of save progress. Okay, and we just have to remember to set on change listeners. Okay, and there's one more thing that we have to do for this to work, and that is actually to save the progress. So we're saving it to our database, but we haven't really defined what is inside of this progress object that we're going to be saving. So first name, we're good, but progress, we need to find a way to keep track of. And this progress is actually going to be an object, if you remember what we defined in our data set. And what we're going to do is we're going to create another function, and we're going to call that function set progress. And again, function names, you can call them whatever you want. They don't have to be called this. This is just the names that I chose. And this set progress is going to be also a loop. So I'm going to copy over this for loop over here. And basically what set progress is going to do is it's going to loop through each of the inputs, and it's going to set the progress property value for that input to the value of that input. And that was a mouthful, so let's actually do it, and you should have a better idea of what it would be. So progress, and then tap into a certain property. And that property is going to be dynamic, and it's going to be input, or we can actually just call it form input just to be a little more clear. And then we will put in a variable here, which will be I. So we're going to be setting each of these properties in progress, and we're going to be setting them to the value of the corresponding input element. So this will be form input, and don't forget the little small w, form input, and I dot value. Okay, so this will loop through each of our inputs and save the input to our local progress object, not yet to our data set. And then we're going to run save progress. So before we run save progress, we could actually create a wrapper function. So we'll call it save. And this will be equal to set progress and then save progress. And then we can just change this out for plain old save. Okay, so now if everything worked correctly, we should be seeing our inputs saving to the database. Okay, so let's check that out, format that, and I'm going to head over to preview mode. Great, and I'm going to start filling out this form. So, Eton, wow. And you can see here now that it started saving the progress. And if we take a look at our progress item, okay, so here I'm not seeing that any of the values have been saved. Let's take a look over here. So we say here, okay, WA has been saved, okay? And take a look over here. And WA has been saved because I haven't put in my email yet. So let's put in inbound beacon at gmail.com and head out there. And let's see if we save progress again. And we have our email here. So you see that the values are saving into my progress item. And if we go back to the editor and then check out our actual collection, where is my collection? Progress. And let's open that collection. Then we will see that we saved the item and the progress, but you can see also that we saved 4 different items, which is not what we wanted to do. And the problem is because I have not been setting the progress ID variable. So I'm going to go ahead and delete all of these. And head back to our code. And what I need to do is that after we save progress and we get back this item over here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set progress ID to equal item.id. And then this progress ID will be used the next time that we save, and it should save to the same item. And let's just demonstrate that. So I'm going to head over here and Aton, where inbound beacon at gmail.com. And let's choose a level, let's say intermediate. Okay. And I'm going to head back to the editor and go to our progress collection, open it, and we will see that there should be only one item. Okay, and in here we have our progress saved and the first name saved. So this is all working great. And now we need to take it one step further, and we want to actually load the person's progress when they come back to the form, if they left. So in order to do that, we're going to need to create a new function, and we're going to call that load progress. So I'm going to put that right over here after all the saving. Load progress. And here we're going to need to use a data query. And this data query will be querying our, WiX data.query. And this will be querying that same collection of progress log that we've been saving to. And we're going to be looking for an item where the member ID is equal to our current member ID. And we're going to find that. And then we are going to set our progress variable to equal the progress that's returned from the query. Okay, so here we get results, a result, and then let's say if result.items.length is bigger than 0, so if we actually got something back from this query, then let's say that progress is equal to result.items 0 progress. Okay, and that basically means that we're going to load that data into our variable. And let's also set the progress ID so that we remember to save to the right place again and again. So I'm going to set progress ID. ID will be equal to, two S's here, and same thing here, but just with progress, just ID of this item. Okay. And we're going to load this progress inside of our getMember function because this getMember is a promise. That means it's something that takes time. And we only want to load our previous entries after we know that we have our member ID. And the way to do that securely is to do it after we get back our member inside of this promise. So I'm going to put load progress over here. And after that, what we need to do is we actually need to set the values of our inputs to be the progress that we loaded. And to do that, we're going to say, and that we're going to have another function over here. And I'm going to call that load inputs. Again, naming, you can name it whatever you want. I might choose something differently if I thought about it a little more, but for now, that is clear enough to me. And in this load inputs, what we're going to do is we're also going to have a for loop. So I'm just going to copy over our for loop from over here and get rid of this in the middle. And we're basically going to do the reverse of what we did in set progress. Okay, so in set progress, what we did is we set the data in the progress object from the inputs, and now we're going to be setting the inputs from the progress object. I'm just going to paste that right over here, and we're just going to be switching around these two things. So I'm going to cut this and equals. Okay, so our form input, the input's actual values be equal to whatever comes back from progress. Okay, and we're going to load these inputs here inside of load progress after we get back our progress item. So I'm going to say load inputs over here. Okay, and this should be enough to load our inputs correctly if everything is going well. And to check that out, let's go into preview mode. Okay, and you can see here that my last name and email have both loaded. My course level has loaded. First name has not loaded because I forgot to add that as part of the deal here. And in order to do that, I'm just going to create another global variable and call that first name. And then what I'm going to do here is after I load my progress, I'm going to have here first name is equal to results.item0.firstname. And if you wanted to like make more concise code, you can give another name to results.item0 and then use that. I'm just kind of going with the flow here. And then when we load the inputs, we need to remember to set first name as well. So we're going to say here that first name dot value should be equal to first name. And let's go and preview that now and see if that solved our issue with first name. And you can see that my first name has loaded. Okay, so now we have just created an auto-saving form that saves whenever the person enters a new input. And you could also set, as I said, by time interval, you can have kind of continue buttons or save buttons that are along the way. If it's a very long form, you can kind of choose how to handle this. But this can really improve user experience. I was filling out the form and then I decided to leave and I came back, or my computer shut off in the middle or something like that, and I didn't lose all of my progress. And this can really kind of upgrade your website and create a much better user experience. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.